My husband and I moved to Texas for work a few years ago and moved into a lovely condo. He, however, is in the military and had spent the last 3 months deployed in Iraq. That means I've pretty much been living here by myself since then. It's been kinda weird, honestly. I married my husband right out of college, so I've never lived by myself before. The neighbors all knew he was gone, and I threw a big going-away party for him as well. The people in the building would stop by occasionally, inviting me over for dinner or to hang out with them or whatever. It definitely made me feel more at home by myself at least. Nothing weird happened for the first few months or so. I was careful about not going out alone at night. I locked all my doors, didn't talk to any strangers. It seemed to be going pretty well safety-wise. That is, until just the other night. I was asleep in my bed when I heard a sudden banging on my front door. Like full-on about to bust the door down, pounding on the front door. Then I heard a man shouting through it, "Dallas police, open up!" Like any good law-abiding citizen would, I very groggily threw on my robe and hoofed it over to my door, fully prepared to open it right away and see what I could do for Dallas's finest. Right as I was reaching toward it though, for some reason, I froze. It dawned on me, and I thought, this is really strange. What could the long arm of the law possibly want so urgently with a 3rd grade teacher that it couldn't wait until a more reasonable hour? I paused for a moment and looked out my peephole. All I could see was darkness. This was very odd. Even though it was nighttime, there was a light right outside my door. I should have been able to see something at least. I stepped back very perturbed, kind of standing there quietly in front of my door, evaluating the situation in my head. I wasn't really sure what I should do in this moment. After standing there, pounding on the door with me on the other side, and requesting I open it for a very impressive amount of time, it seemed to have stopped altogether. I just kinda stood there awkwardly with my cat, now very alarmed and very confused. Immediately after, I heard at least 2 people start talking in hushed tones. I don't think they knew I could still hear them. She knows we're here. Well, come on, let's just give it a minute. Man, she's gotta open the door. Fuck this shit, dude, let's just get out of here. At that point, as soon as he said that, I knew there was something rotten in Denmark. No policeman was going to say all that. I was still kind of groggy, but at that point I was awfully damn sure I was not going to open this door. I turned on my heel and ran back to my bedroom, where, like the fully grown woman that I am, I pulled the covers over my head and sat there silently listening. I woke up the next morning. The odd situation from the night before was far removed from my mind as I got dressed and ate breakfast. As I was leaving my house to go to work though, I noticed something. There was a wad of tape over my peephole. I realized I should have called the actual police, so I took the opportunity to very calmly run back into my condo, lock the door, and call the law. They came and confirmed the obvious. No actual policemen had been dispatched to my residence, or even anywhere near the entire building. They couldn't really do anything now though, but they said I should call them if the guys ever come back again. Here's hoping they never do. This happened when I was 21 years old. There had been a series of break-ins in my area around this time, and some of my neighbors had even been robbed at knife point. There had also been a few sexual assaults during those break-ins as well. At the time of this incident, no one had been caught for those crimes yet, so everyone was on ultra-high alert. I myself was scared to be alone in my home. I had been attacked in another similar incident before, and I was still traumatized from that event. Unfortunately, I was alone on this particular night. Something woke me up at about 1 a.m. I was laying there in my bed, awake, wide alert, and listening. I couldn't hear anything else at first, so I laughed at myself and assumed I must have just been dreaming. I went down to my kitchen to grab myself a cold drink to calm down. Now, my kitchen windows have no blinds on them, and therefore anyone out in the backyard can see inside. I had a back door light that I always kept on at night. As I closed my refrigerator door, which was slightly reflective, I could see the reflection of a man peering into my house. He must have climbed over my back wall. I could see the man holding something shiny in his hand. I was scared at this point. I didn't know what to do. Do I run to the living room and call the police? Do I start screaming? Do I try to run out the front door for help? 100 different options flew through my mind in seconds. I decided to do this. I opened my refrigerator door again, put my cold drink back in, and took out half a watermelon that was lying in there. I grabbed a knife from the drawer next to me. I placed the watermelon on the kitchen counter. Then, with the most maniacal, sick grin I could muster, I started stabbing the watermelon furiously on the open half. The juice was spraying everywhere. I laughed hysterically and stabbed away, mainly because I was really fucking scared and truly hysterical at this point. With my clothes and hands dripping with watermelon juice, I turned towards the window and flashed the knife above my shoulders. The man was still there. I looked him dead in the eye and smiled as I licked the knife. It probably came out as a bit of a sneer. Doing the best crazy impression I could, I opened my eyes wide, and then started to laugh into the night. I walked towards him, gripping the knife in my hands. The guy looked at me for a moment, then turned around and ran, screaming like a crazed maniac into the night. His screams woke the neighbors, who shouted after him to shut up. I never did call the police, mainly because I didn't really know what to tell them. I guess I didn't want to admit I would have done my best to stab that man had he not run away. I slept with my watermelon knife that night and cleaned up the mess in the morning. So this happened around 2 years ago, when I was 20 years old. Backstory, I'm quite small actually. I was doing some shopping in town alone. I remember it was a warm Sunday afternoon. People were out and about with their families, and it was quite busy in the city center. I had some free time to myself, so I decided to pay my grandma a visit. To get to her place, you needed to take a 20-minute bus ride from where I was. On to the story now. I was waiting there for my bus to arrive when I noticed a man staring at me. He didn't seem to be much older than I was. I remember he had on this very peculiar bright yellow hat as well. I usually don't care when someone looks at me, but this man was sort of looking at me like he was angry, like I had done something to offend him. Most people at the bus stop were either facing traffic or looking at the coming buses, but not this man. He had his back to the street and was just staring at me angrily. I got a weird feeling because of this. Still though, I saw my bus coming very soon and hoped he wouldn't get on as well. Of course, he followed on right behind me. I quickly slid into a window seat. Luckily for me, there was a kindly old lady sat next to me. She acted as a bit of a shield between me and this guy. The man stood next to our seat almost the entire ride, except for occasionally pacing around a couple of times. I was already quite freaked out by his behavior. I was texting my at-the-time boyfriend throughout the event. While he hadn't actually done anything to me, I was getting a really bad gut feeling about this guy. A few stops before mine, unfortunately, the old lady had to depart from the bus. At this point, the man's behavior became even stranger. He sat down next to me, of course, which made me tense up right away. I refused to even look at my phone or text anyone in case he saw me typing something he could use to look me up later. I think he sensed he was making me tense up. He got back and went to standing next to my seat and staring at me. My stop came and I waited to the very last moment to get off. Of course, he also got off as well. What followed confirmed he was indeed after me. I guess in an attempt to put me off again, he ran ahead of me on the road, glancing back the entire way. Luckily for me though, him doing so gave me my only out from the situation. If he would have kept walking behind me, I would have been forced to either make a run for the apartment door and hope I was fast enough to close it before he got there, or run in a random direction and hope I reached a safe place before he did. I was out of the city center now, and there weren't many people around to help me. Because he decided to run ahead and wait for me though, in that split moment I decided to turn around and run in the other direction and dial my mom. It was pretty bad, but I decided to call my mom in case anything happened to me, so she would know who it was. I told my mom what was happening. Down the road, I spotted this small burger place. They would surely have a security guard. My mom told me to run for there and tell them what was going on. I ran as fast as I could. I saw the man had now turned around and noticed me going the other direction. He began fully sprinting after me. I was almost ready to cry. Luckily, I reached the burger place before he caught me. From the window, I could see him sprinting across the road. I guess him seeing me get into the place, though, threw him off. I have no idea why he fixated on me, why he seemed so angry, or what his plans were if he caught me, and I'm not sure I want to know. In 2010, I was living in Quincy, Massachusetts with my husband, a new baby, and a roommate. It was a Saturday, so I was taking a much-needed break from the little one and went to run some errands and have some alone time. My first stop was to the local Radio Shack to get a phone accessory. After my purchase, I walked out in deep thought about my to-do list, enjoying being Sans baby for a day, when a voice broke through my reverie. Excuse me, miss, could you help me for a moment? I blinked in confusion and looked over at the man who just addressed me. My first impression of him was Italian grandpa. Everything about him was beige. His khaki slacks, his cardigan and tweed flat cap, his sandy-colored mustache even. Even the car he stood next to, a boat-sized town car, was a similar color. I hesitated a bit. As a big believer in the golden rule, I generally tried to help people out whenever I could. But this time, something about this situation gave me a bit of pause. I stood there in the middle of the parking lot. What did you need help with? I asked. The man smiled warmly. I think there's something wrong with my car. He held out his key fob. Whenever I click my car key, the door locks won't lock. It's very strange. You probably know more about this stuff than I do. Can you come over and take a look for me real quick? He gestured over to his car and clicked the fob in demonstration. Still hesitating, I said, I don't know anything about cars. We're right here at Radio Shack though. Maybe they can help you out. No. I think we can figure this out together. Come on, give it a quick look. Again, I repeated I didn't think I could help him. I could see he was getting very agitated, and yet he continued to force a smile. He walked over to the back of his car and popped open the trunk. Here's the strangest thing though. The doors don't lock, but the trunk still will. He started waving at me eagerly. Come on, come take a look. I began to feel very confused. Part of me wanted to go over and help still, but my greater instincts prevailed. I began to walk away, repeating over and over to the man, I can't help you, just go inside and ask for help. As I started to walk away, I saw him throw his arms up in anger. He slammed down the trunk, hopped in his car, and drove away. I drove on to my next errand, feeling very unsettled. As I tried to process the encounter, I began to have doubts about my reaction though. Maybe he really was just an old man that needed help. Did I do the right thing? When I returned home, I shared the encounter with my husband and roommate. I expected they'd laugh and assure me I was being overly paranoid. Instead, they looked at me with wide eyes. Apparently, this is a very common plot to try and kidnap someone in the area I'm from. I didn't report the incident to the police, as I didn't get useful information regarding the license plate number. I didn't think a man asking for help with his car counted as harassment in the moment. On a lark, I decided to Google attempted kidnappings in Quincy in hopes that my search would turn up empty, that this would be a truly innocent, if awkward, encounter. Imagine my dismay when actual articles talking about this sort of thing popped up.
I found a particular one and immediately recognized the perpetrator as that same man from the Radio Shack parking lot. A follow-up article revealed he actually lived in my old neighborhood. I often wonder if I was one of his first attempts at kidnapping, and what would have happened to me if I had gone over to look in his trunk. This happened about 2 years ago. I was a junior in college, living in a small apartment off campus with one female roommate. We were both very busy students, and so rarely home at the same time. One afternoon, I was sitting there by myself working on a project. A white truck I didn't recognize pulled into the parking lot. I could see it stopping from my window. I didn't really think anything of it until I heard a knock at the door. A man, maybe in his mid-50s, heavily bearded with dirty white overalls and a white cap, was standing there in front of it. I opened the door a bit, without letting him in. "Hi, I'm with the realty company that owns the property. We're doing a routine check of the smoke detector batteries and air filters." This was strange to me. There had been a check done just a few months prior, and we weren't due for another yet. Additionally, the property manager almost always called ahead at least 24 hours, as per our lease agreement, to let us know the contractors they hired to do this stuff were coming. We hadn't been informed this time. I asked what company he was with, and if he had any sort of identification on him. His truck was unmarked after all, and neither his hat nor his shirt had any kind of logo on them. I don't usually carry that stuff around with me. My name is Charlie. It'll only take a few minutes. We're doing all the units in this area. It was very suspicious to me. He should have at least had something to identify he was who he said he was. I had that feeling in my gut that something was not right here. I told him I wouldn't be letting him in, and if he came back with ID, I would do so the next time. He got very angry but agreed to come back later. He hopped in his truck and drove off, not going into any of the other apartments like he'd said he was going to. Heart pounding, I immediately shut and locked the door and called my roommate. She agreed it was weird and suggested I call the property manager. I don't recall sending anyone to the property today or recently. Why don't you call the contractor yourself and see what's up? When I called the contracting company and described the man, they said that not only did they not have anyone on that route today or anytime soon, they of course also did not have a single employee by that name or that looked anything like the man I described. They said I should call the police. I was on edge for a few weeks, but the man never returned. I don't want to think about what his intentions were, entering the apartment of a college girl all by herself, and I also don't know why he only went to my apartment either. My parents shared this story with me some years ago, but I had forgotten about it until fairly recently. To give some context, I was born via C-section in a fairly decent hospital. At the time, it lacked a supervised parking lot, having instead an open parking space, whose sole guards were a group of people that would often clean the cars for a fee. Not that the C-section went badly or anything, but my mom had to stay some days in the hospital after I was born. She got a bit sick. I must say my dad is to this day yet to forgive any member of my mother's family for barely showing up to either visit or care for her. He never left us alone, as it was sadly very common back then to have kids snatched away, either by medical staff or random strangers. It doesn't happen that often anymore, but it was fairly rampant back then. By the time my mom and I were given the green light to go, my dad walked her to the parking lot. My mom was holding me in my blankets, and everything was going fairly normal, save for the fact it was getting quite dark out. Suddenly, they noticed a man approaching them, one hand inside his jacket. The guy was walking towards them at a seemingly slow pace. My parents knew right away, though, there was something off with this guy. My mom was in no condition to run, and my dad refused to leave her behind should this guy attack. They silently decided it would be best if my mom let my dad run away with me if the situation arose. As they were still somewhat separated from the man, my dad pushed my mom in another direction, trying to go back to the hospital. The man called out in a raspy voice, "You've got a pretty baby girl in your arms. May I see her?" This raised alarms in both my parents. I was covered from head to toe in at least 2 layers of thick blankets. Only my mom could see my face, and they hadn't even talked to the man before. If he knew I was a girl, that must have meant he'd been following my parents from inside the hospital. They had little time to react, as the man quickly started to run at them. They knew they wouldn't make it back to the hospital on time. No other person was around the area to help, and they thought they were done for. Fortunately for them, one of the guards came rushing to their aid, screaming at the man. The dude was old, but he had enough strength to beat this weirdo good. What's better, the ruckus began to attract the other guards, who shielded my parents and beat the creep and forced him to run away, chasing him until he was nowhere near the hospital. Turned out the guard had actually seen the man from a distance, but it wasn't until he'd spotted my parents coming around the corner that he realized what was going on. My parents are forever grateful for the interference of those men, who not only saved them from being potentially killed, but also saved me from either being sold to another family illegally, or for other shadier business I don't even want to think about.